Hello and welcome back to the game room. You know what I love? Video games. You know what I love talking about? Games. And it seems like a lot of people these days who cover games seem to hate them. Or at least the people who play them. Well, that's not me, and that's not the 3,257 of you beautiful people checking out this video here today. Oh my goodness, we finally did it. We are doing something that is not Xbox 360 related. And it wasn't supposed to be that way. It's just my big area rug downstairs got dirty this week, and my wife and I have spent far too much time dealing with that situation, to which I just didn't have any time to play any Xbox this week. So I wanted to take one of the suggestions I got from you viewers a few months back, which was do your top 3 games for your top 3 consoles. Now, to be honest, I don't really know what my top 3 consoles are. One of them would probably be the Xbox 360. And since I've talked to death about the 360, I thought we'd take a break from that this week. But if I was to guess, maybe it would be the SNES, PS1, and then the Xbox or the Switch, or I don't know. So the third one I'm not too sure on, but I'm pretty certain on the SNES and the PS1. Well, I decided, why don't we do that? Instead of top 3 consoles, we're just going to do 3 consoles. So bear in mind, we are doing SNES and PS1 this time, so there you know, these are some of my favorite systems. And then instead of top 3, we're doing top 5 because I just can't help myself. So if that sounds interesting to you, let's check it out. There's a lot of games out there, some of which you've never even heard of. That's where I come in. My name's Luke. I've been playing games since the age of 2, and I have no life.
This is my game room.
Alright, now I'm going to be honest with you guys, a lot of these answers aren't going to be all that surprising. A lot of the games you think of when you think of these systems are going to be my top games for those systems. Now, one caveat, the first game I'm going to talk about is my favorite game for the system, but the remaining 4, I'm kind of up in the air, you know, depending on the day where it ranks. Even some of them may be above my number 1. So it's just with top, you know, it's funny, the older you get, the more games you get experience to, the longer you get from the experience. You start to cool off on some games, you start to warm up more on other ones, you get introduced to new games that you think you want to rate higher, but then it's like, or is that this recency bias? So we're going to talk about these, but I'm also going to be mentioning some honorable mentions too. So let's start with the SNES, which this has been my favorite game of all time for the longest time, at least the one I constantly say is my favorite game of all time, and that would be The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. That's right, I'm a Zelda guy with the SNES. I am not Chrono Trigger, I am not Final Fantasy 3/6, Mega Man X, Castlevania, no, Super Metroid, no. Zelda: Link to the Past, the game that originally cemented the Zelda formula, really launched what an action-adventure game could be on the SNES. Came out in 1992, but you can still play it today, and there are still games out there trying to emulate what this game did. In my opinion, never does it quite as well, because they always try and throw in some other secret sauce and muck it up or make it take twice as long. You know, something like Tunic, where you can't read what's going on in the world to make it more fun and cryptic. But Link to the Past, I love everything about this game. I love the amount of dungeons, the pacing is perfect. You get items that are unnecessary sometimes by exploring the overworld. You can find gold. There is not a cap on your wallet size, which they introduced in later Zelda games. So from the offset, you can get up to 999 rupees and not have to waste them. The heart pieces for 4 heart pieces is perfect. Getting things like the Zorafin, everything about this, and then the Dark World, the whole Dark World, Light World mechanic where you double the effective size of the map and then can swap backwards and forwards. Finding the whistle, the different secrets, getting the big pink bot, like everything about this game is so amazing. I love everything about how this game is crafted, the storyline, the length. It can be beaten. You know, I know this game by heart, so I know exactly where to go, when to go. So you can probably beat it in 4 to 7 hours, just straight through. Which I think I've done. This particular copy I've had since childhood. My wife has beaten this game on this copy. it is such a great game and is my absolute favorite game on the Super NES. And if you've never played Link to the Past, give it a shot, because it really is the foundation for so many Zelda clones that we know and love today. Okay, now the next one, this one is more of a recent game. It's funny. With the SNES, it seems like a lot of the games that become your favorite just tend to be the ones you played first and may or may not be the best. Hence why I'm saying Link to the Past over things like Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI. Well, this was the first game I reviewed by myself on the channel, the first game I played dedicated for this channel, and was a game that I had heard of for years beforehand, and I had never imagined I'd have a chance to play it until I stumbled across reproduction carts, which back in 2014 I was not all that familiar with. The idea of playing a game that didn't come out in the United States on my actual Super Nintendo from childhood was really cool, and that game was Terranigma. So Terranigma is a action-adventure game, but it's an action RPG. So it's the third unofficial trilogy game of the Quintet saga of Soul Blazer and Illusion of Gaia, people who made ActRaiser. This game only came out in PAL territories and in Japan, even though it was completely translated because Square Enix USA had Enix USA had shut down in 1995, largely because of the changes to ActRaiser 2, and then that led to us not getting a localization of Terranigma, which is a shame because this is a very good game, wonderful music, wonderful thematic settings, and is deep. Like, the whole thing about the Quintet games, especially when I played Illusion of Gaia recently, was, wow, there actually is some really nice resonance of story in these things that maybe my 8-year-old self wouldn't have appreciated, but my 38-year-old self definitely does. And this was just such a nice way to start off in 2015 when I was doing the SNES translate, or the games, the SNES games not released in America. With this one, I really enjoyed it. I love the fact that they used our real world as the dungeons. So, for instance, the Great Lakes is a dungeon, the Great Wall of China, no, maybe not a Great, maybe it was an Illusion of Gaia. But still, they used real world settings for the actual places in the game. And it's just a very, very heartfelt experience, and something that, in my opinion, gets lost a little bit from the SNES to the PS1 era. And I think we've only started to recapture some of that earnestness in, local indie game developers and things of that nature. Is that there's a lot of heart in this game, and if you've played Terranigma, you know. And if you haven't heard of it, haven't played it, highly recommend finding a way to play it. It is still not officially released out here. Secret of Mana 2 became Trials of Mana, but this is probably, other than Mother 3, one of the most requested games to be released here in the West, and I would love to see more people get experienced with Terranigma, because it is fantastic. Alright, now this next game was one of the few games that was not released on the SNES Classic that should have been, but because of licensing, likely it was just not going to happen. It's not a very deep game, but it's a very, very fun game. Always good to play with a friend, especially, and that is Turtles in Time. Probably, hands down, my favorite beat-em-up of all time. Streets of Rage 4 is pretty damn good too, but definitely for its time, there was nothing as good as Turtles in Time. I had the NES Turtles games, and I remember we had tried it, just didn't quite get into it. It wasn't as good, and then finally they released this one on the Super Nintendo, and it was like, oh my god, it legitimately felt like you had an arcade experience at home. And to us, it looked like it was an arcade experience too. Play as all the different turtles. The throwing the enemies at the screen was amazing. It was a long game too, but not so long that you couldn't beat it. So you didn't have that Contra 3 effect where you just kept hitting a wall. You could beat this game. Definitely, you could beat this game. One of the last things I did with my buddy Sean was we beat Turtles in Time in one sitting, and it was a wonderful occasion. Still wonderful to play through to this day. And the Genesis one is fun too, don't get me wrong. And Shredder's Revenge that just came out is a nice, not reimagining, but a nice addition to what this franchise is. But for me, nothing quite competes still with the original. And I definitely, if you have a Super Nintendo, Turtles in Time, that's a must-have. You need to have that game. Speaking of must-haves, Another one that I just absolutely adore for the Super Nintendo. Once again, like I said, there's a lot of basic bitch answers here. And that is Super Mario World. You know, I really wanted to leave this off and put on something like Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy III that I have played in recent years. But it just, I feel like I'd be doing a disservice to my actual memories and what I actually played if I got rid of Super Mario World, just because it is one of those things where it's always fun. It was one of those games where it was fun to imagine scenarios in your own head and play it out on the screen and just go through the different areas, find the different secrets, find the secret world where you could get unlimited items and Yoshi. And just, you know, the Star World, all these things now that are kind of ho-hum and used in other games were fresh back then, much like Link to the Past. They really cemented a lot of the tropes that we still see to this day, and things like Super Mario Wonder and other games that really, it's just not the same. It's funny, you can only, at least for someone who knows, it's hard to recapture that magic again. But Super Mario World still, to this day, I mean, one of the best memories I have in recent years gaming with friends was when I was at my buddy Donovan's wedding, and my friend Wes and I, at like 2 a.m. or midnight, just decided to try and see how far we could get into Mario World from a fresh game. And I think we got all the way to World 4 before we passed out at 3 a.m. the day before our buddy's wedding. But still, a lot of fun. All right, and then the last one. So once again, this is probably the other reason why Final Fantasy III and Chrono Trigger got held off. Yet again, it's the first one you play that really sets the tone. And for me, the first true SNES Squaresoft RPG I played is one that you've probably never heard of, and that's a game called Treasure of the Rudras. Now, this was actually the first video I ever did on this channel, back when I had my buddy doing the video with me, but we had no gameplay footage. I had just bought a camera and said I want to do videos and I want to talk about games, and I wanted to talk about this game, but I didn't have a capture card yet. I had no way of doing anything. No one was even talking about this game, and we just threw something together, and I think he found like one clip of gameplay footage to put into the video. But more or less, it is the game that was released between Final Fantasy VI and VII. So it has the same caliber of artwork and a lot of the same caliber of storytelling, in my opinion. And it's why that one edges out Final Fantasy VI for myself, because, once again, that's the first one I played. And it was just so cool. It felt like I was finding a hidden secret that no one else knew about. Because no one did. Even to this day, not many people know about Treasure of the Rudras. So if that sounds interesting, it is a game that is of the caliber of mid-90s Squaresoft. You play as 3 different scenarios, and then each one of those scenarios interacts with the other 2, much like in Resident Evil 2, when you have Claire and Leon run into each other, and then when you play the other side scenario, you see the other side of that conversation. That happens in this, but there's 3 different people. So you'll have Riza, who will go and make it rain for the first time in years. And then in Serlant's scenario, you'll be in this tower that's about to crumble, and you see it start to rain, and then you send the tower into the sky, which earlier, when you played Riza's scenario, you had seen the tower go into the sky. So it's very cool that as you play through the game, you are seeing these major events and having these major events suddenly happen that when you play the other 2 scenarios, you are either directly involved with, or you're in your own thing and that thing happens again and can have an effect you didn't see coming. So it's a very unique game in that regard, as well as there's a magic system where you can basically get the most powerful spell at the beginning of the game if you have the mana to use it. So, because you only have so many resources to use it. There's words of power. So you write spells down where it says like Ra La Da or Fa Sa La, which I always talk about how nerdy it is. I made a spell book I actually got because at the time I was working and I had these little steno notebooks. So I would write down the words of power and string them together, and I would figure out what spells worked. And by the time I got through the first scenario, I had a pretty solid spell book that I then just translated immediately into scenarios 2 or 3. So whereas the first scenario took, say 20 hours, the second 2 took close to 10 hours or less because I knew how to mid-max my combat. Basically, you can dump all of your power into your melee fighter and then do huge damage with double crit and destroy people, which is awesome. But you don't figure that out until you get through one of the scenarios. And after you beat all three, you unlock a fourth scenario, and the fourth scenario ties the whole game up into a nice little bow and allows you to play as a fourth character who has messed with all three characters throughout the game. And the music is incredible, the artwork is next level, and this was a game that Squaresoft ideally thought was going to replace Final Fantasy. They had planned on it. Instead of Final Fantasy being based largely in Christian mythology, Treasure of the Rudras was based more in Eastern philosophy. But because Final Fantasy VII came out and really lit the world on fire, then Treasure of the Rudras was never heard from. And because I think it came out within a month of Final Fantasy VII, even in Japan, that's why we didn't get a translation of it. But a wonderful game. Take a look at it. See if you can find it. Highly recommend. So that's my Super Nintendo top 5. Now let's move over, speaking of the PlayStation, to the PlayStation. Now you notice on the Super Nintendo, I did mention Mega Man X, Castlevania 4, Super Metroid, Chrono Trigger 5. All these games could have been on the list, don't get me wrong. And if these are yours, I completely get it. These were just mine, as well as ones I was trying to stay true to myself as far as what I thought back when I was playing these actively. And that's going to be how the rest of these are too. So my number one for the PlayStation 1, you already know it if you know the channel. This debatably is overpassed Link to the Past now that I've even gotten older, but we'll see. And that is Final Fantasy Tactics. I have spoken to death about this game. I love Final Fantasy Tactics. Tactical genre, turn-based strategy with tactical elements is something that I always love. Regardless, unless it's Disgaea. I did not like Disgaea, but maybe I should start. I heard those ones compound on each other, but anyways, Final Fantasy Tactics is the perfect match of a very good storyline and then a cool nuance with the Zodiac Brave story, which you start the game thinking it's going to be like Tactics Ogre, and then suddenly, you know, much like Game of Thrones, you know, the first season of Game of Thrones, you're in a world where nothing is mythical. You know, you see these weird white creatures at the beginning. Okay, nothing happens. And then dragons come out at the end of the first season. And that's what Final Fantasy Tactics is like. It's towards the end of the first chapter. You get introduced to the Lucavi. And then, oh my goodness, does it get nuts. And there's missable events. It's a long game. You can craft your own team. The job system is incredible. It's so much fun figuring out how to unlock the other jobs, especially back then when you didn't know how to get them. You would just have a new job populate on your job selection, and you'd be like, oh my god, what is a geomancer? What is a to this day, I still don't know how the damn calculator works. That is why I am not good with math, because that is definitely a class meant for math. But overall, phenomenal game. I still prefer the PS1 version to the one on the PSP, even though the PSP introduces a couple of classes like the Onion Knight and the Dark Knight, which I'd love to have. But you know this one's got to be coming up for a remake one of these years. I know we had Triangle Strategy, which was a nice try, but I feel like Triangle Strategy leaned too much into the Tactics Ogre side of things and not enough into the Final Fantasy Tactics. But love that game, highly recommend it. Everyone should play that one. Alright, another one on the PS1 that for years has been one of the absolute best games on the system, in my opinion. Still to this day, the original Metal Gear Solid. Which ironically, when I say the original, this is actually the third game in the Metal Gear series, if not more, because there was the other ones on the MSX and then the NES ports. But for layman's term, this is kind of the Solid Snake start, even though it's called Solid Snake. Anyways. Metal Gear Solid was a very cool game. I remember reading about it in Game Informer, RIP, back in 97, 98, and it sounded interesting. I'm not a big fan of stealth games, but this was also in the stealth genre. That whole thing was just coming into its own. It was the first 3D foray for Metal Gear, and it had a high production look. It had voice acting. It had really interesting characters. So I always say this game reminds me of the movie Die Hard, because it's one guy against an entire complex of terrorists. You have a support system in your codec where you can talk to them, and then you're going through and you're meeting these different characters and just, hopefully outlasting them till the end. Now, it is a Kojima game, so there's a lot of stuff in this game that goes over your head, especially went over my head when I played it when I was 12, talking about this and that, and genome this, and splicing that, and then you're like, oh, wait, if they didn't make Liquid Snake, named Liquid Snake, and looked like you, who would know? And then they talk about these other clones, and like the story definitely goes off the rails, but the characters themselves keep you so invested, like Vulcan Raven, Psycho Mantis. Mantis reading your damn memory card, having to plug in the controller and the controller too. Like there's still these moments that are unheralded and unmatched, even in the later Metal Gear games. Especially for me, Metal Gear 2 really kind of betrayed the formula by having you play as Raiden. Metal Gear 3, you're not playing as Solid Snake, you're playing as Big Boss. And then Metal Gear 4 is Old Man Snake, and then Metal Gear 5 is Kiefer Sutherland. So really the only game that really got everything right, still to this day, is Metal Gear 1. And unlike the Twin Snakes remake of it, I think it is benefited by its restrictions of not having the ability to go into a first-person angle and then shoot. Because, I mean, you play Twin Snakes, it really trivializes a lot of the fights, especially the Revolver Ocelot fight, because you can literally just go into first-person mode and pop them off. Same thing with the ninja fight. Like, it's just not as tense, not knowing where, like, okay, I'm just aiming at some random place and hoping to hit them. Anyways, Metal Gear Solid, phenomenal game. I don't have to tell you guys, that one up there needs to be played, needs to be checked out. Okay. Now, here is a recent one. So this is one that I played very recently. And I had a couple of recent games that I could have put on this video. You know, Vandal Hearts 2 was excellent. I really liked how good that game was. Alundra was excellent. Really enjoyed that game too, as far as being a non-Zelda Zelda clone. But the one that really stuck with me was Vanguard Bandits. And Vanguard Bandits is another Working Designs game, though even though they're prevalent in it, they don't seem to be super prevalent outside of the Valley Girl character and the Yoda character. Everything else seems pretty toned down. But it's just a very unique way of integrating the combat with the story, and then having branching paths that are easy to miss and make it incentivized to have multiple playthroughs, because you can go through it and you can get the Tic Tac in one, you can go through it and you can get another type of vehicle, and it's just fun. And like, it's a tactical game. I love these tactical games, and this is one that came out in 2000. It was the last game made by Human Entertainment, which is the company behind the Clock Tower series, and another one. I don't think it's a fighting game. Anyways, really like this game, and it's a shame it's one of the more pricey games on the PS1. I mean, these other ones luckily have stayed pretty reasonable, and ironically it replaced a game that would have been on this list, which is Final Fantasy VIII. Yeah, I know, I like Final Fantasy VIII. Spoilers, Final Fantasy VII is not here, nor is 9. I love 7. I don't really care for 9, but 8 is the one that I really appreciated, and that one just got edged out by Vanguard Bandits. So that should tell you the quality of this game. Then again, I like Final Fantasy VIII, so that should also tell you about my opinions. Okay, now this is the game that originally got me a PS1. I saw this in Game Informer, and this was back when I had the N64 and there was just a games drought. Nothing came out for the N64. I also, somehow, the place I pre-ordered mine broke street date 2 months early. So I got an N64 like around June or July of 1995 when the thing, or 96, whatever year it came out. Basically, when it came out in September of that year, I had it way earlier. Well, I had like 4 games after a year and a half, or 5 games, and it got to the point, I think it was when Killer Instinct Gold came out. I'm like, okay, I can't buy another fighting game. I'm not into these fighting games as much. I got Mortal Kombat Trilogy. I don't want what else is out there? And that's when I got Game Informer, and I was seeing a image of this crazy game that had realistic looking graphics. People looked like people, and they were zombies, and real looking blood, and all this. Like, it was very intriguing. And it was a preview for Resident Evil 2. And I'd never even heard of the first Resident Evil. Like I said, I was kind of sheltered from the PS1, as at the time I'd only been reading Nintendo Power. So when I got Game Informer, it was very much a learning curve of learning about, oh, there's all this other games out there. Because you saw, Crash Bandicoot commercials and things like that, but never, like, I didn't see any Resident Evil commercials. Even if I did, it probably would have had anything to do with the game, since that's the way 90s commercials were. But Resident Evil 2 just looked really, really interesting. And that's why I bought a PS1 for this damn game. And I got Resident Evil 1 Director's Cut because it had a demo for Resident Evil 2 in it. And I played that demo, saw the liquor, terrified. And finally, when the game came out, I just went whole hog into it. But even as much as I played it, I could not get through the B scenarios with either Leon or Claire, because that damn Mr. X, man, I cannot handle unkillable stalkers, which is probably part of the reason why I only beat Resident Evil 3 once. But I did eventually get through it, and it's funny, speaking of my buddy Wes, he had said that Resident Evil 2 was one of his least favorite Resident Evils, and I told him, like, did you know about A and B side? And he didn't. And then he went through and he played the B sides, got obsessed, unlocked Hunk, unlocked Tofu, did all that, and now that's like one of his favorite Resident Evils. It has great pacing as well, and it's just one of those things where, yes, I know they made the Resident Evil 2 remake recently. I played a little bit, but it is famously one of the games I stopped playing just because, I don't know, I like the tank controls. I like the isolated feel in this. I like not having to aim my controller. I mean, it's funny, as much as it is nice having a first-person free aim mode, one of the things that really made the early PlayStation era really free and easy for me was not having to worry about aiming. Generally, if you pointed in the direction of the enemy, it hit it, just like it did in Metal Gear. And so with Resident Evil 2, now you have to worry about hitting that. Like, I enjoy it in some games, but not in every one. Like, in a survival, Dead Space is a different one, but in that one, you're cutting limbs off. So, anyways, Resident Evil 2, great game. All right, let me pick it up. I know I'm rambling on too long here. All right, the last game we're going to talk about for the original PlayStation is one that I really debated putting on here, but it ultimately deserves its spot, and that's Symphony of the Night, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, the game that stole the action-adventure genre and renamed it Metroidvania, even though it's more or less just a Metroid game with RPG elements. When then after that, every game that then became a Metroidvania was more or less just a Metroid game, but I digress, and Metroid is really just an action-adventure game, but we'll get to it. I'm going to do a video talking about genres one of these days. Yeah, Symphony of the Night, incredible. Such a good game. The opening up the mirror map and doubling the length of the game is still next level. The voice acting is incredible, just like the voice acting in Resident Evil 1. So good. All right, let's get to the next game, next console, rather. So the last console we're going to talk about is the GameCube. And the GameCube was my favorite console of that generation as well. I don't like using 3rd generation, 4th generation, 5th generation, 6th, all that kind of crap. I think GameCube is the 6th generation. That's the Xbox, PS2, GameCube era. I just call it the GameCube era, the PS2 era, whatever. But anyways, my favorite game on the GameCube, bar none, hands down, Fire Emblem, Path of Radiance. Funny, like another tactical game, right? So this was one of the first games I found after Final Fantasy Tactics that was a tactical game, but unlike Final Fantasy Tactics, this was a game where you had all of your troops act and then all the enemy acted. So it wasn't an ATB time or a timing wise where it was different where you could influence it. No. Every person gets a turn, every action gets put in place, and then everyone else gets in turn. So you could really plan ahead that way because you could guarantee a move to go off. Or if you blocked a choke point with one character, then you don't have to worry about them moving because if it's your turn, you can replenish that choke point. So it opens up a lot of cool and interesting tactics. And it's just a fun game. It's level-based, or mission-based rather. So you get little story, you get mission, and then you get after story, and then so on and so forth, which I really like that pacing for my Fire Emblem games. Unfortunately, lately, they've been doing this overworld thing and this kind of academy thing, and that was one of the best things I think about Fire Emblem Engage, is it really mitigated some of that stuff and relegated it to more unnecessary, in my opinion. Still, Fire Emblem Path of the Radiance is to this day my favorite Fire Emblem game. I love Ike. I was disappointed with the sequel, the one Path of Radiant Dawn, because Ike wasn't in it enough. But a wonderful game, terrific, sucks it's super expensive. Maybe Nintendo will do a re-release of that one of these days, or we'll finally get GameCube games on the Switch too, whenever that comes out. But yeah, wonderful game. Highly recommend it. Check it out. So this is one that you can get on modern consoles, but it originally came out on the GameCube, and it was such a revelation when it did. It was the first, basically this is the game that showed remakes could be worth picking up, in my opinion. And that is Resident Evil Remake. This still to this day might be the greatest remake ever made. You know why? It both honors the source material, it respects the original story, it maintains the original gameplay, and it adds to it in ways that are intelligent and justify their existence rather than simply just having it happen. So there's completely different areas. There's an area with a great white shark now that if you had saved, I think his name was Rob, from the snake venom in Chris's playthrough, he gets eaten by that shark. Like, that's incredible. There's a crypts area that is now in the back area of the mansion that's just better integrated. The scarlet zombies that need you to burn them to kill them permanently are terrifying. And just, you know what? The voice acting being better is probably a good thing. To be honest, I didn't notice it when I played it back in the day because I was so, like, it's such a gorgeous, beautiful looking game. Like, the graphics on this when it was on the GameCube looked next level. So that's why when people were talking about PS2 and Xbox, but we had the Resident Evil Remake, like, are you kidding me? The leap from PS1 to the GameCube version of this game in 5 years was so stupidly cool. Now we get a remake of The Last of Us Remake, and The Last of Us Part 1 Remake that all looks virtually the same. Maybe they improved the frame rate or did this or that, or if you're some tech junkie. But just, it could be the same game versus Resident Evil Remake versus the original is so good. And luckily you can still play it to this day. It's the one that's always re-released on every modern console. Alright. Last few ones we're getting down here. So you can't talk about the GameCube without talking about Super Smash Bros. Melee. This was the game that really, I mean, Smash Bros. On the N64 was great, don't get me wrong, but man, did Melee improve everything. It's the one who taught me that there was such a thing as Fire Emblem, because Marth and Roy are unlockable characters, and you're like, who the hell are these people? Which also, side note, I'm hearing more and more people say the GameCube controller was janky. I don't know who the hell has that opinion, but that certainly was not the opinion back in the day. That controller is one of the most comfortable controllers to this day. Great placement of buttons. Yeah, the digital pad wasn't that great, but to be honest, not many games on the GameCube used the digital pad. And yeah, the one Z triggered on the thing instead of two, that was a little strange, but I would say it's a little strange, but not janky. It's super comfortable. There's a reason why there was a GameCube adapter for every single console up to the Wii U. In fact, I think you can use the dang things on the Switch even. I think that adapter for the Wii U works on the Switch, because that's the definitive Melee controller. And I'll die on that hill. So yeah, Melee, great game, super fun. They're still making it to this day. Well, they're making Smash Brothers to this day. All right, and then another game that I absolutely adore on the GameCube is Pikmin 2. Pikmin 4 came out, and to be honest, is a better launching point for almost anyone to the series if they haven't played it. I still really like Pikmin 2. I think I might prefer it just because Pikmin 4 really, it's a long game. It's a lot of bloat. There's a lot of unnecessary stuff and extensions for, modern reasons. Where they make everything so much damn longer. But Pikmin 2 is nice. You could have more than just 3 Pikmin types. That's another thing they did in Pikmin 4, where they limited. You can only have 3 types of Pikmin out at once, which is stupid. Part of the fun is having all the different Pikmin out, and just seeing 100 Pikmin behind you in 2004 was really cool to see. I mean, like I said, they started making the series actively worse with Pikmin 3, in my opinion. And so, highly recommend taking this one. It's a fun game. It reminds me of a mashup of Toe Jam and Earl's Searching the World for Items, and then a little bit of an RTS where you're controlling units, but it's just you controlling one subset of units. And that's where Pikmin 4 really gives you a lot more of that automation. But anyways, then the last game we're going to talk about here, which is one that will probably be surprising a lot of people, as you wouldn't think. Now, I could have mentioned Eternal Darkness, I could have mentioned Mario Sunshine, Luigi's Mansion, but I like to get a little bit more interesting answers, and a game that I really loved on the GameCube, it's not even GameCube exclusive, it's on the other two as well, PS2 and Xbox, that's Gladius. And if you can't tell, there's a trend here. I really like tactical games. And this was a tactical game that had two completely separate campaigns, either the Barbarian or the Roman. I only beat the Roman's campaign. And there was another thing in it where you could be locked in zones, and then there was no permanent death if you fought in the arena. But if you fought outside of the arena and you lost your guy, there would be permanent death. And I basically played through this whole game without ever fighting outside of the arena, which led to me not being able to beat certain arenas. Because you'll get certain fights in arenas that you have to grind up. There's no way you can beat them with your squad. You can recruit within matches, you can recruit from other people. It's similar to Final Fantasy Tactics. It's kind of like a combination of Final Fantasy Tactics and Fire Emblem in that regard. And the biggest drawback I had is that when I played the Roman scenario, his best friend Ludo has a part where he is not in your team towards the end of it for a spell, and he has an attack called backslash or bottom slash, some sort of attack that was such an effective attack that I basically built my whole team around it, and then losing him really hurt me, but I still beat the game. Well, yes, Gladius, another wonderful game. One of the last good LucasArts games to come out, if I remember, because that was 2000. It was 2002. I don't know. They had some good ones after that. But anyways, that is the top 5 games of 3 of my top favorite systems. Let me know about what your favorite games for these systems are. Let me know if you enjoyed a break from the Xbox 360. I'm tired, guys. I need to get back to cleaning that dang rug. As always, I release a new video every Tuesday. It's been so nice getting a hold of you. Take care.